So we're going to have this virtual debate on the threats to the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime and the ways to stem them. You will have, each one of the presenters will have 10 minutes to present the ideas that you have shared with your group. So let's start with group number 1. I have Ricardo Miranda from Bolivia. He's going to present. So if you could, we'll say your name and name of your team, and we're ready to listen to your ideas, Ricardo. Thanks.
Well, thank you all. We had a very fruitful discussion with my team number 1. We are discussed in detail so many things that happened during the past weeks and what our inputs and our visions are regarding all of this. So I'm going to go in a series of key messages, so to speak, in order to express what the group thinks it's important, and what are the challenges in the future. So we see that universalization is one of the biggest issues here. Universalization grants member states the right to actually call on other states, and to have a universal tool that everyone could call on and lean upon. And this lack of universalization is also probably one of the reasons why all this architecture that we have has not been as effective as we could have all wanted. So the challenges on avoiding an arms race, we also discussed this, could also be related to budgeting. We're discussing what are the reasons for governments not to ask to their peoples and to their populations on how to invest these funds and these resources. So in order not to invest in arms race or in proliferation or in the development and perfection of new weapons, this budget could actually be allocated to some other issues that could be more calling or more pressing on certain contexts. But again, it all translates to an arms race that has been the fuel that has been making proliferation a big problem as it is. We also think that raising awareness is very important in order to achieve universalization and in order to achieve an effective non-proliferation effort. In this regard, the testimonies from victims become a really useful tool that unfortunately in the international fora is only related or relegated to side events where major stakeholders and decision makers are not necessarily paying that much attention. So part of the group, and we agreed all on this, that this is important because it brings intergenerational justice. So the crimes and the horrors that happen in the past do not repeat in the future. And this awareness has to be transmitted through generations. So the processes even that involve all these negotiations on non-proliferation have this sense of being something that did not happen in the past and that will not happen in the future because it's a risk. It's something that is pressing and it's calm. And also this lack of awareness regarding the testimony of victims translates in most of these efforts and almost in that all these efforts about legislating the use of these weapons become so stale and are so ineffective. So it's important to have on board the fact that intergenerational justice and having the testimonies of victims also contribute to the future of mankind in general. And this is something very important that is also related to the effects of proliferation and the use of nuclear energy. And here we have to make a distinction between disarmament and the development of nuclear energy. We have this dichotomy that, of course, everyone wants disarmament, but at the same time, we all accept the fact that we need nuclear energy as it's a source of energy that's effective. And this brings us to the fact that there is a situation where we find a benefit versus impact, where the disposal, for instance, of all this nuclear waste and the creation of nuclear cemeteries has affected our region in particular. As we heard from the colleagues in the group, we have cases where these nuclear cemeteries are somehow located near the Mexican border, for instance, or in Mexican territory. And of course, this comes from nuclear powers, i.e. The US, that actually dispose this waste in our region. So as a region that is free of nuclear weapon, as a region that has an involvement and a connection with a most ecological view, we think that this is also a problem. And this is a debate that should be addressed, the benefit versus impact. And at the same time, we're also discussing about the role of women in non-proliferation efforts. This translates on not only the decision-making processes that were usually taken by men. It does not only involve the humanitarian vision that was also introduced by SCRC, but it also goes to the rationale of the feminist vision about developing a war system, because a war system involves not only thinking that war and the possibility of this from happening, but also involves training and developing weapons. And the feminist vision actually tells us that there's, we have this rationale about the war system and thinking that at some point this might be morally acceptable, which happened in the past. But this vision also lets us know that there are effects on rights of the people, on basic rights and human rights, and effects on democracies and how these democracies are being built in the future after the use of these weapons. So unfortunately, as we saw, the possibility of finding in the past morally acceptable the use of weapons of mass destruction or nuclear technology translates also in the documents that are now being negotiated in language against third parties. So we have this like double standards about the people who actually own these weapons, who produce these weapons, signaling the rest of the countries or the international community as people that could potentially have this, and this is something that also should be addressed. Nuclear warfare has only been used twice in the history of mankind in the context of war. And we see that there is a persistent logic of I was there, I was there first. And this is what contributes to this development of having an arms race. And because of this logic of I was there first, or I did this first, I think that nuclear weapons could also be seen as bargain tools, as it has been seen with the DPRK or Iran, for instance, countries that fear that they might be prone to be targeted with sanctions or with other kind of attacks. So they decide to develop this weapon so they have something to bargain with. And this is also a problem that affects the efforts on non-proliferation and the efforts on actually legislating this as something that is sound with what everyone wants. Particularly when we talk about developing and this creating this legislation that could help us avoid the scenarios where we find ourselves under a nuclear threat. We think that multilateralism is the utmost important tool. Multilateralism creates all these spaces and fora for us to legislate on these issues and to address these issues. And multilateralism provides the tools for states that are non-nuclear and states that are nuclear to have a horizontal dialogue. And this is very important. And in this regard, we also think that it's important to think about the negotiation strategies, talking about this international legislation, as our region has an important effect in the international community, being a region that is thriving economically, a region that has economical exchanges with the world and with most of these nuclear superpowers. So maybe we should use this particular status that the region has in order to find a means to make the negotiations switching from something practical to something legal, or have enough leverage as a region that has no nuclear weapons and it's a nuclear free zone to try to make an impact on the course of these negotiations, which we think it's very important, and we think it's part of these efforts that we could have as a region, as a whole region that has absolutely no nuclear weapons, to use, and to put ourselves as an example for the international community. So before I close, I wanted to just let you all know that Group 1 is composed by Blanca Ileana Villazón, Elena Curcio, Gabriela Torres, José Enrique Sienra, Maria Alejandra Oliva, Marilyn Rodas, Paula Pedraza, Shafiq Sam, and myself, Ricardo Miranda. Thank you.
Oh, well, thanks. Thank you very much, Ricardo. It looks like your group actually summarized a lot of the points that we touched upon the course. To summarize it very briefly, and you talk about the importance of universalization, the importance of race awareness and budgeting regarding your arms race. The nuclear powers, and also the importance of actually establishing this difference between disarmament and nuclear power energy and benefits. So thank you very much. I'm putting here the notes if we have time to discuss them later. And now I would like to go with Group 2, for which we'll be presenting Ana Avila from Costa Rica. The floor is yours, Ana.
Thank you, Marta Mariana. I think Michelle will be helping me to share the presentation. Thank you. Okay, so we discussed a little bit about what are the main challenges and threats, and also what kind of initiatives or activities we could take to try to improve the situations. So first of all, the first threat that we have identified is regarding the security of nuclear material, and especially we're concerned about the security of military of the nuclear material that is being used for military purposes, since this is something that at least we don't have like an international fora open discussion on how the security happens. Unlike that of civilian use, that there are certain architecture in place, like we heard yesterday. For the military use, there's much less discussions internationally, and it really is up to the nuclear possessors how they are dealing with the security. And we think that it's a big concern on how terrorists could use this vulnerabilities of the systems. And even like a nuclear war could be started if there's any like spoofing or any cost from a country to believe that another country is trying to attack them with nuclear weapons. So we think that this is like a very big threat that is out there that that would really affect us. The second idea we have is that as long as there is a reliance from the security strategies on nuclear weapons, this will always be a threat. And therefore, something that needs to be worked in the international conversations is how can we go moving from the concept of using deterrence as a security measure to trying to remove that. So something that we were talking about is that we need to move beyond the ideas of non-proliferation, and not to limit ourselves on the concept of non-proliferation, but actually move towards the discussion on prohibition and disarmament. And this is, I think, very important when we look at the way that countries develop their concepts, their paradigms of security of the countries. So we think that it's important to keep this conversation going and to move us forward on changing these paradigms and changing the mentality that nuclear weapons actually generate security, and to understand that having these nuclear weapons is a cause of insecurity for the world. Then the next idea that we wanted to share is that there are really no mechanisms or tools for non-nuclear weapons to verify what kind of activities are being done by nuclear weapon states. So this is also a problem of vulnerability, because we don't know as much as how this weapons are being, let's say, how they're used in a strategic point of view, and about how the nuclear weapon umbrella is also affected on this. So this is also a big vulnerability for the world. So the solutions that we're looking at, it would come on the next slide. We think the most important element that we have to rely on is increasing awareness and increasing the participation of civil society and the involvement. We believe that in most countries, most of the people actually don't want to have nuclear weapons, and they don't want to see countries having nuclear weapons. Therefore, the active involvement of people, having a say on how their countries create their security strategies is something very important. But that will only happen if we have an increased awareness of it. So especially if we consider the participation of youth, the participation of women, how can we really help the decision makers to change their paradigms and to change the way that security is being perceived? It's really important to focus on this. And that's why we think that particularly NGOs can play a crucial role in bringing the world forward towards this different view of looking at security. I think finally, the last concept that we wanted to bring is on how, very concrete thoughts or ideas that we can put in place would be within the framework of the TPMW, working towards verification and to actually develop a specific concrete measures of verification that can be there in place, ready to be used when, let's say, civil society manages to push the decision makers into deciding to go towards disarmament. So it's good that we could also work on this technically sound processes of verification that would be a tool that allow us to implement them when the decision is made to go into disarmament. So the members of the group are these people that you can see: myself, Cristian Fernando Anchel Luisa, Gabriela Ramirez, Carmelita Deonarin, Lisa van der Kaden, Lloyd Eugene, Maria Jimena Alvarez, Michelle Ramirez, Sarelda Alarcón, and Joali Garcia. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. And to recap, you're identifying the need to actually consider a way to verify nuclear material and nuclear security, and more precisely, verification of the nuclear weapon states, if I understood correctly, regarding their weapons and their the development of their systems. And then you, as a proposal, are thinking about increasing the awareness and involvement of different actors, in this case, civil society and NGOs, and a way of establish sort of a verification process within the frame of the ban treaty. Here I was just wondering, not for you to answer right now, but what would imply that verification? I mean, for that, would it be needed for the nuclear weapon states to first adhere to the ban treaty, or what you were thinking when making that proposal? But we will leave it for later. Now, let me introduce Group 3, it's going to be presenting on behalf of them Uriel Perez from Mexico. So Uriel, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Marta. Good morning, everyone. I will share my screen. Just give me 1 second. Okay, hello, everyone. My name is Uriel Perez. I'm from Mexico, and I will present the conclusions of group number 3. We have been sharing and discussing these ideas since Wednesday, and the group members are Aquila Seale from Trinidad and Tobago, Dea James from San Vincent, Douglas Nascimento from Brazil, Jose Murillo from Costa Rica, Mariana San Martin from Mexico, Paulina Gonzalez from Mexico, Saribet Gutierrez from Panama, Soshin Parman from Guyana, and me from Mexico. So what we conclude is we identified 6 main challenges on the non-proliferation and disarmament regime. And for each of these challenges, we also are proposing some possible solutions for each of these challenges. So first, the challenge that we identify. First is the change in mindset. We believe that there is a need to change the mindset of countries that strongly believe in nuclear weapons, from a non-proliferation to a prohibition and disarmament approach. Some states believe that nuclear weapons are still a sign of power and the only solution to security. Number 2, lack of attention on developing countries. Developing countries continue to experience a situation where their concerns are not adequately addressed, including, but not limited to, the issue of proliferation of nuclear weapons. These countries, as non-nuclear weapons states, are frequently forced to abide by the decisions by the more powerful countries regarding nuclear weapons. Number 3, nuclear technologies in black markets. Since Pakistani nuclear engineer Abdul Qadir Khan, there has been a spread of sensitive nuclear technologies on the black market, which also has led to the concerns of on nuclear terrorism, as we discussed yesterday, with the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 1540. Number 4, a sophistication of nuclear arsenal. We find a challenge in the sophistication of nuclear arsenal that only make it look smaller, but frequently this is claimed as disarmament, while it is all the way around, and it is enhanced arsenal, which many times does not require to be tested. Number 5, the growing of mistrust among powers. The new world politics put a lot of security pressure towards the relations between many states, such as, for example, Russia, China, the US, the European Union, Iran, and other states. There is a growing mistrust of powers that undermine the path for peace and increases the need to support security programs, including those related to nuclear weapons. Number 6, and finally, all legal instruments. The NPT entered into force in 1970, more than 50 years ago. Critics could argue that some of the treaty provisions are too ambiguous for present days, as the drafters of the treaty could not have predicted global trends, and therefore the treaty has not evolved with time. So these are the 6 main challenges that we identified, and now the 6 proposals that we have to address each of these are: first, a massive campaign. A campaign including the participation of civil society to raise awareness on decision policymakers and politicians of the need to quit the idea of nuclear weapons as deterrents. While there are some states whose population may approve the possession of nuclear weapons, such as, for example, the United States, there are many more against them, including host states of nuclear weapons, for example, Belgium, Italy, and others. Non-nuclear weapons states should seek partnerships with organizations, NGOs in their respective home countries that have interests in non-proliferation and disarmament, and similar organizations in nuclear weapons states. A special focus deserves young people, since the issue of nuclear disarmament is generally seen as distant by them. This could be done by raising awareness with a viral campaign through social media. In this sense, civil society could begin to put more pressure on the governments which continue to believe that nuclear weapons are necessary to guarantee their national, regional, and international security. 2, foster the role of Latin America and the Caribbean. And here is where we think, as diplomats from this region, we have a better chance to forward when we have when we were in position to do so. The Latin America and Caribbean regions is a nuclear weapons-free zone, and through concerted effort can advance the disarmament and non-proliferation agenda at the level of the United Nations. The region can also be used as a model for advocacy to promote the ratification of treaties, such as the TPNW and the CTBT. Latin America and the Caribbean also have a moral and pragmatic experience in creating nuclear-free zones in the world. The promotion as region could perhaps facilitate dialogues for other regions, as such, for example, the Middle East. Outreach. We propose an educational aspect focused on raising awareness among general public about the real consequences of an eventual detonation, accident, or miscalculation, aiming at changing future generation perspective on this issue. This also could help so public engage against nuclear terrorist acts. 4, gradual reduction of nuclear arsenals. The goal is to encourage further reduction of nuclear arsenal by nuclear weapons states, as well as greater transparency about their nuclear arsenal as an fissile material. This could be done by promoting unilateral voluntary commitments. Examples provided yesterday by Dr. Nicolai within the START Treaty show that states usually go beyond these voluntary commitments. And this could also lead to a domino effect, as the one mentioned by Jan yesterday. Number 5, preventive diplomacy. Preventive diplomacy, which is provided in Article 99 of the United Nations Charter, has been used in the past to prevent nuclear confrontation. One main example on this aspect was a role by former UN Secretary General U Thant during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. This is a mechanism that could be used in future, increasing tensions between states. And finally, regarding the update of legal binding instruments, a proposal would be to amend or update current legal texts to make them more flexible, so more states ratify them. However, we are aware that it is important to consider that this could lead to a backlash of the regime and to the withdrawal of other states parties to those treaties. So these are the main conclusions of group number 3, and that will be all for my part. Thank you.
Well, perfect. Thank you very much, Julian. That was a very specific presentation regarding some of the threats and the answers. I particularly like the mention about fostering the role of American, Latin, and the Caribbean, and the preventive diplomacy and the update of the legislation that exists right now. And as you accurately mentioned, is you as the young diplomats of the region, that ones that would have the chance to do so. So putting here this information, and now let's go with group number 4, or last group, so we can start the debate. It will be Maria Fernanda Cámara. She's also from Mexico. Maria Fernanda, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share the screen with the presentation we made, which is that one. Wait. There we go. Okay, so the challenges that we identified to nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, to the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime. Oh, wait. There you go. Sorry. The first and the most important thing, and I think we all see this the same way, how to properly outreach to civil society. We all know that policymakers are very much influenced by public opinion. It's been like that forever. But activism has decreased since the 80s in this regard. So we gotta make an assessment as for why did this happen and how to push it forward. To push it forward, we think that we should engage societies in plural, so every country's societies, to increase knowledge on this subject and the awareness of the risk posed by nuclearization. We all know what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but we don't think we're aware of what would it be if it happened here in Latin America or the Caribbean, in one of the islands. We should push for a grassroots approach to exert influence over policymakers in each country. Yes, multilateralism is a great tool, but we gotta start pushing domestically for these changes that, for example, some of you were mentioning on how how to change our own legislation so things happen. And in this regard, increasing advocacy in youth on nuclearization as an existential threat, to make it seem as something that is familiar, something that is closer, not something that is on the long term that will never happen to me, but that it's that everybody's interests are at risk here. The challenge is to make the indisputable link between nuclear testing and environment as a very approachable topic. We must push for a widespread campaign as big as climate change is and has been for the last years. Try to do the same with nuclearization. Continue or invite international organizations as Greenpeace, for example, to continue their support on this subject, but on this topic, sorry, but also calling on regional bodies to help out with this awareness campaign. Pushing for alternative sustainable sources of power. Nuclear power, yes, it is one of the sources that we can use, but what about solar? What about wind power? We should also push for those a little bit. And finally, in this point, we propose to make an amendment to the Treaty on Prohibition to include a reference to the consequences, the direct consequences of nuclear testing of the states that have the weapons, and that they must take responsibility for any action that they incur outside of their territories, not only in their own countries, but what about, and we discussed their Marshall Islands and who take responsibility to what happened there. Third challenge, how to engage the media in the discussion, how to do it properly. Traditional mass media, TV, newspapers, the radio, are more prone to discuss these matters, but what role, sorry, does social media play? Here, one of the main actions that we propose is all that scientific analysis that is done, all that very political discussions that we have, using all the acronyms that we use, is not the way to talk to everyday citizens. We need to use common language, so it's more tangible for people when they're listening to this discussion. Maybe select or call on a couple of influencers, now that they're so trendy in the social media, in each region, and they could help highlight this discussion and bring the conversation to people's mind. Actively combat misinformation through training like this, of course, with us diplomats, but what about schools? What about even kids? What about civil society? And that brings us back to the importance that civil society has in all this work. And as some of you mentioned, in the end, this will help us change the mindset. It doesn't take 3 months, it doesn't take 3 years, but little by little, we can push for changing the mindset so people really are aware of the risk posed by nuclear weapons. And finally, approach the nuclear weapon states as affected parties, not just as afflicting, not as the ones that produce the harm, but the ones that are also involved in that in a little bit. Calling the continuous trend to call on these nuclear weapon states, on desisting from exerting their strength, is only a good faith assumption, and we should move beyond that with other measures. Arms control, or the system that currently is there for arms control, hasn't been really working for some time. I would say that it just got to a point where it doesn't move beyond what already has been achieved. So there has to be a way to involve them a little bit more. And of course, the lack of punitive measures are for non-compliance with organizations' mandates to what is said in all these treaties, just makes nuclear weapon states continue to break the rules and to do the testing and not taking responsibility for the environmental or humanitarian consequences that those testings have. Those tests have. How to address this? push beyond bilateral deterrence, multilateralism, we talked about it, regional approaches. The great example that Latin America and the Caribbean play on this, and how to make it happen elsewhere in other regions in the world. Increase domestic pressure, and that brings us back to civil society and the great role that civil society in each country has. There are movements even in nuclear weapon states, so how to make those grow and increasingly influence the policymakers that must, we hope, should listen to their people. Have a pragmatic approach and engaging nuclear weapon states, maybe as observers in the free zones, maybe in the monitoring tasks in the free zones, not directly, but little by little. That'll make them maybe change their stance about the matter. Foster active cooperation among the different free zones, nuclear weapon free zones that are in the globe. Continue technology transfer for development. The nuclear weapon states usually are more advanced and have greater technology and have better resources. Well, they could help out and they could bring those technologies to the other countries and help with the monitoring, for example, and help with other ways. And finally, the bargaining chip here are alternative nuclear technologies. Nuclear weapons is not the only way we can use nuclear energy. There are other things that we could do with that technology, and maybe that is the bargaining chip that should be used. And the team composed by Aliaca from St. Vincent, Andres from Guatemala, Carlos from Panama, David Eduardo from Honduras, Israel, Venezuela, Marcelo, Brazil, Enrique from Mexico, and myself. And our facilitator, Jan, thank you so much for your help in this.
Well, thank you very much, Maria Fernanda, for that also very comprehensive presentation. Well, your team mentioned this link between the awareness of, for example, climate change and nuclear energy, and that's and nuclear weapons. That's something that has been pointed out during the past years, and of course, is important to put that awareness. You know, climate change have, for example, Greta Thunberg and Leonardo DiCaprio. No, so what could be done to put nuclear weapons risk at that same level in the conversation, as you mentioned, also with everyday citizens? That's another often critique that we as nuclear advocates or scientifics have, that we talk in a language that's understandable among each other, but not for everyday people. So, Jan, I don't know what you think. We have still 20 minutes. I think that the presentations were very good, that they raised a lot of interesting points. And I'm not sure if you want to comment something or if you want guys to talk each other. Jan.
Thank you very much, Marta Mariana, and thank you so much for the 4 presenters and all the groups that participated in this. I am very impressed and I'm very pleased. You know, as course coordinator, you often wonder whether knowledge was transferred and people absorbed it, and I think on that perspective we can be very pleased. Not me, but you are, since this is very much your course. You know, we started with Dr. Potter's sometimes doom and gloom presentation, and he does this on purpose because, you know, it's kind of the shock and awe approach to shock people into reality. And quite frankly, and if you look, and I think one of the last presenters that we had, Dr. Nikolai Sokov, he is very much a realist. And over the last 2 years, Marta Mariana will recall, he also made a presentation to the visiting fellows when she was a part of that group, and it was kind of always very pessimistic. I mean, arms control is basically dead. And there was a little glimmer of hope in his presentation yesterday, but I don't say that I'm optimistic based on what I've heard so far, but what I am pleased about is that you have identified a whole range of ideas, right? And I think we should debate those ideas a little bit and get some sense from you, you know, what would be the key issues. I hope, and I see Marta Mariana agreed to do this, is that we could prepare a little aid memoir for you to take home after this, basically to your ministries, and say, hey, this is what I think, or what we thought were the top challenges. I mean, we're not going to try and prioritize them unless you wish to do so, but that would be a far more. Then we have to enter into negotiations, but kind of just a menu of ideas. Again, as I mentioned yesterday, you are, for most part, young diplomats, sort of at the beginning part of your careers. And here's an opportunity for you to kind of say, you know, I heard from some of the world's top experts in this field. I shared some ideas with colleagues from around the region. And I believe that our country or our ministry or whatever should focus on some of these ideas and build that out. I can, in this field that we operate in, there are not that many specialists. And so this is an opportunity for you to establish yourself. You know, there's this kind of saying in English that you're a small fish in a big pond, right? So we're all small fish, but the size of the pond matters. If you're a small fish in a small pond, you actually have more opportunities than a small fish in a large pond. And so you operate in maybe small ponds, but you're a small fish, but therefore you have more opportunities that you could utilize. So what I would ask from the four panelists, if I may, Marta Mariana, is if you could tell me, one, what you think is, I mean, you listed a lot of challenges, and it was really interesting. What do you think is the one, from your perspective, the one most critical challenge? And then two, what would you think is the most innovative approach to deal with a challenge? And three, what is the wild card, the unforeseen thing that we don't necessarily expect? What, you know, I don't want to even think about it. A nuclear bomb goes off, or you know, the combination, I think all four groups had this linkage with climate change, which is, I think, from the awareness perspective, that's why you addressed it. But and again, I don't want to look at into an apocalyptic crystal ball, but do we see that would be a wake-up call? You know, so I wanted to get some impressions from you on that. Thank you, and well done again.
Who wants to go first? If no one volunteers, I'm just going to pick you. Anna, please.
So I think the real biggest challenge that we have is the fact that some countries are relying on the concept of security that is very that is not a global concept of security. You know, that is a limited concept of security that focuses on for example, using nuclear weapons as part of their strategy, but it's very limited view. And I think the biggest tool that we have in our hands to change that is to take advantage of the participation of more diverse group of people into the construction of concepts of security. So we can, like it was mentioned in some cases, we can use, for example, the feminist approach to international relations and pushing that forward to have a holistic concept of human security that can allow us to move forward in that sense. And I think the wild card for me, honestly, the biggest concern right now is how concepts like artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons are being developed, and how that can interact eventually with nuclear warfare. I think that's a very, very scary thing.
It is indeed. Thank you, Anna. Who else wants to jump on this? To be part of the presenters or anyone? Maria Fernanda, you want to do?
Yes, just remind me the second question, Jen, because I was making some note. The third is which is the priority? The third is this one that Lana said.
An innovative approach to address these threats.
Okay. Well, I think, and I hope the group would concur in this, that the priority is civil society, how to get everybody involved. And I'm gonna give a very precise example. I am one of those who before this course didn't think that this was part of my circle, you know, that it was very far away from what I see, from what I experience every day. And although it is, and thank God for that, it's not something that'll happen tomorrow and something that I can see here in my backyard. It is a major risk, and the threat is there. So if we can get more people with this change, as I experimented through this, because of all the information the whole team gave, that's what we can, that's how we can achieve for more, to make this like a real movement and make it bigger. As we were saying, climate change is big, let's make this as big as climate change. So definitely the priority should be getting civil society on board through the diverse lenses that we have discussed, but to get us all on track. The innovative approach, I would say it could be through social media. I'm trying to use as common examples as possible, because that's the way I see it, from the perspective that I just think that denuclearization, non-proliferation is so idealistic. Yes, it is, but there's ways to achieve that. And if the world and in international organizations weren't so idealistic, we wouldn't be where we are, and we wouldn't have achieved a peaceful, basically a peaceful Earth for the last couple of years, and not major conflict. We wouldn't have been able to leave world wars behind. There's a risk and there's challenges in regional conflicts, of course, and they pose great threats. But we haven't gotten to such a big scenario as world wars and the many threats that they pose. And the wild card, I would say cybercrime. That is a very, very, very not only unprecedented situation. They bring unprecedented situations and cases, but you never know who could be behind that. You never know who could develop the technologies and the knowledge and the abilities to push the wrong button from far away. So that is, I think that is also a big thing there.
Thank you very much, Maria Fernanda. Very interesting. Who else would like to make just final remarks? Ricardo, please.
Thank you. I think that probably one of the most critical challenges that we have is that for some part of the media and the mainstream media, this is a subject that tends to be overlooked. It's not something that it's constantly on the public sphere, you know, taking or calling for the attention of governments or civil actors. I think that one of the most shocking things that we saw, besides the testimony from the survivor of the bombing of Hiroshima, was the fact that we have a doomsday clock that it's now more than ever closer to midnight. And this is a pressing issue. You know, this is also linked to what I said at the beginning of our presentation of the group, that this is probably hindering universalization as well. This is one of the reasons why most stakeholders do not take action when they're supposed to. And I think that one of the most innovative approaches to deal with this challenge is to make commitments. Yes, we all root for multilateralism, and I think that multilateralism could be the answer for the stage that we find ourselves at. We see examples, for example, of the 2030 agenda or the SDGs that involve everyone, and everyone wants to be part of it. So probably an innovative way to reach the same kind of attention, or to call for the same attention on these issues, could be something that could be dealt in this like high fora that is similar to the 2030 agenda, where everyone is involved, when everyone makes commitments, and these commitments are measurable in time. I think that this could be an interesting approach. Of course, the region, again, has a preeminence in this, because it's a region that has fulfilled pretty much every commitment that has made. Most of our countries are signatories of pretty much every human rights covenant or treaty, for instance. And this is an example that gives us the chance and the moral again to actually call for this, and probably be the ones who start this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. That's true. You in your presentation mentioned actually the importance of multilateralism and the region and foster cooperation. And you just mentioned is something that you should take into consideration for your daily job, and you never know when you're going to use it. But Latin America and the Caribbean is a very, very important region regarding these matters. Now, Maria Fernanda wants to say something.
Thank you. Just something that came to my mind right now about the question, which is the wild card. What about accountability? What about the nuclear weapon states taking responsibility to what they have done, to the testing they've done, and to the great damage that we listen to there is in the Marshall Islands, for example? So I think that some action has to be taken in order to make them accountable for the damage they've caused on others.
Yeah, no, that's very, very interesting. And you mentioned also in your presentation, this thinking about an amendment to the nuclear weapon, to the ban treaty. And of course, and don't take me wrong, I'm a very, very idealistic nuclear advocate in this sense. But it's just thinking, how could we do that? I mean, the nuclear states are part of the NPT, and some might say that they haven't fulfilled their obligation regarding that. And now we have the ban treaty. They don't want to be part of the ban treaty. It's, as you also mentioned, a job that's going to take more time, and that we need to continue pushing on. I don't know if anyone else wants to take the floor, but perfect. Enrique.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment. I mean, I think that I would say that the biggest challenge is there are like several challenges that produces all of them a big challenge, which is first the increasing tensions worldwide, and the fact that we have moved from a polarized world in which just the United States and Russia used to matter in this topic, from more and more countries and superpowers are, even if they are not really developing more nuclear programs, such as India or North Korea, they can do it because they are not engaging with the current international treaties. So that, together with the fact that most of the treaties nowadays are really stuck, because we have advanced, there are no more proliferation programs, there haven't been any bombings, nuclear bombings. Yeah, that's true. But if we take a look at the treaties, we as a region and non-nuclear weapon states tend to be very idealistic. And from my personal perspective, not from the ministry perspective, from a personal perspective, that is a bit problematic, because at the end of the day, we're not committing and engaging those countries that actually have a bigger say in the topic, which are the ones that have nuclear weapons, to engage in those kind of initiatives, because they are so rigid and so idealistic that they cannot actually interact and commit a bit more. So from my personal perspective, an innovative idea would be to flexibilize and to make it more flexible the international instruments and treaties in order for them to commit with the regions that are already free zones. That's one point. And the other point would be to really involve everyone in the debate, and to create sort of a momentum again of the topic of disarmament and the importance of nuclear energy and nuclear weapons to everyone, not just the scientific community, not just diplomats, not just several countries, but everyone. Because if we move in time, we will see that, I mean, what's going to happen? I mean, I asked this several times during the course, but what's going to happen in 50 years' time, in a 50 years' time, if we have the same rigid treaties, if we have the same rigid free zones? I mean, nothing is going to really evolve. I mean, those treaties, from my perspective, lack of flexibility and lack of commitment with those countries that have nuclear weapon states, that are nuclear weapon states. That's just my perspective. And yeah, sorry for being too negative, but that's just my perspective.
No, thank you very much, Enrique. That's actually part of the problem, right? How to gauge the different point of views, but at the end, that's what diplomacy is about, right? So again, you as diplomats are the ones that have a very, very important part of this in your hands. And as Jan mentioned, I think that what you presented today and the presentations, and I know that there's some written material like working papers that you prepared for this today, if we can put it together in like an memoir or something like that, so you can have them, and we as OPANAL could have them also to your archives for future references. If you're okay with that, we're going to put it together. Please send information to Joali Garcia, which is the one that you have been talking to through the mail, and we can gather everything and then circulate it. And that will help us. Also, another recommendation that I have for you is to keep in touch. As Jan mentioned at the beginning of the course, this course is for you, and to have a network and to continue being part of this conversation whenever you need it or whenever you feel like. Now, Jan, I think that we don't have any more interactions.
I see Alfredo's hand up.
I'm sorry, Alfredo.
No, don't worry, Mark. Just a quick comment that I was thinking about, and I want to focus on the topic of the innovative approach, that it shouldn't be that innovative, but I think the gender approach is something that I haven't thought about it since the last weeks. And I don't know if this is related to what I mentioned and other colleagues mentioned about one of the main challenges, that is to change this mindset that probably is very related to this sexism idea that having bigger weapons and better weapons, and probably this would be a better way to deal with this change of mindset, to have a gender approach. Well, that's my comment.
Thank you, Alfredo. Well, I have to say that I love the gender approach, right? But no, definitely, it's something that I will invite you to incorporate to your daily lives. Now, we're used to have these, crazy feminist tag that, oh no, feminists want to incorporate the gender approach and everything. But it's important, it's true. And regarding disarmament and nuclear weapons, you have had the opportunity to see, like, there is an interesting perspective. You might agree with it or not, but you have it now there. So yes, of course.
Martha, if there are no other comments, may I make another comment? Or
Of course.
thank you, and thanks again for the speakers so far. I think I made a couple of sort of very brief notes here because, just sort of for my kind of personal file, which I think this is really interesting. I mean, yes, the role of you kind of discussed the idea of the role of continued role of, and I would say even increased role of nuclear weapons in security for those states that have them. The lack of public awareness, which is not on par with climate change, and the comment that Enrique made about treaties are focused basically on the party, those are parties to them, right? I mean, as a long-time multilateralist and strong believer in multilateral instruments, I must say I actually agree. Take the NPT. You know, many of you started, one of the group actually highlighted the lack of universality early on. So at every review conference, there's this discussion, well, we've got to get India and Pakistan and Israel to join the NPT. This has been going on for decades. This is not being a pessimist. This has been a blunt realist. It's never going to happen, right? And so, you know, I think we need, so because they're not part of the NPT, and they are states, we don't recognize them as nuclear weapon states, we don't engage them. I don't know if I've told you the story. I know I've shared it with Martha Mariana and maybe one or two others, but, you know, many years ago, I negotiated with a key in the non-aligned movement context at the UN. We were negotiating the non-aligned position and preparation for the Durban Heads of State Summit in 2000, if I remember correctly. And it was a famous and very, very, very prominent Indian ambassador there at the meeting, and this was not long after India conducted its nuclear test, and he was really good, and he was trying very subtly to get into the non-aligned document, kind of not recognition, but basically to kind of say, well, you know, India tested a nuclear weapon, while we were on the other hand trying to say we will never recognize that. The non-aligned cannot recognize it. And I made it very clear. I said, there is no circumstances that South Africa will recognize India as a nuclear weapon state. And he kind of looked across the table with a kind of smirk on his face, and he said, which part of my country do you not recognize? The one that we are a state, or that we have nuclear weapons? And I'll never forget that, because you can have a legalistic argument about, is India a nuclear weapon state or not? The fact is, India has nuclear weapons, and so does Israel, and so does North Korea, and so does Pakistan. And so we're going to continue to say, well, they should not be part of the discourse in the NPT, because I think this is what Enrique is in focusing on, kind of this. It's almost too idealistic approach, and that instrument should be more flexible. I really like that idea, and I also like the ideas of changing the discourse a little bit. The gender issue is extremely important, and I think the point that was just made by Uriel is this is we think it's new, but it isn't actually, right? This is long. It's not that it's long overdue. It's always been there. It's just that there's been a far more emphasis on it. But the other one is to put it in the context of something else. So development agenda, absolutely. The development agenda and in climate change go hand in hand. I always kind of say, if you look at least here in the United States, you have a jury that presides over a criminal case, right? And if the jury is compromised, the judge can say, listen, I want to take this jury away and I want to bring a different jury in, right? I almost kind of think if you have to take the nuclear proliferation or nuclear disarmament challenge outside of the current jury and give them to the climate change jury or the development jury, right? And say, okay, you the experts on climate change, if you can come up with a Paris Accord to deal with climate change, or you can come up with the UN development agenda, then take the nuclear disarmament or the nuclear weapons threat and see what you can do with that. The final thing as far as wildcards, yeah, I think those wildcards that are identified, autonomous weapons, AI, cybercrime, and so on. I would add a very serious wildcard to that, and that would be the actual use of a nuclear weapon, either by accident or by design. So thank you very much. I see Blanca. Sorry, Marta, I don't want to take over your role.
Yeah, no, I was just like what Marta Mariana was mentioning earlier, that feminists and in general, we are usually accused of wanting to bring the gender lens to every problem out there in nature and otherwise. But I think that we should do that. I mean, because we are affected in a very different way on most things. Like if you take car security, for example, I mean, cars are being tested on male dummies with male dimensions and muscle mass. And whenever we have a crash, I mean, cars are actually unsafe for us because of this. So, there are many things that we should look with the gender lens, because we are affected differently by these things completely. So, this is one of those things. It could be, I mean, I'm not an expert, but it could be one of those things. And we must never, just like cancel that, just saying, oh, that, like these Me Too or whatever, just like invalidating our voice, because we're just starting to use it. That's it.
Definitely, Blanca. And I'm very glad that you have this gender perspective on your minds now, and everything else that we've seen on the course during this past two weeks. I've already mentioned it, but I'm going to do it again. You have had a chance to listen to top experts on the field.